Good morning, everyone. I have to apologize. I'm recovering from a cold, so my voice is a little bit raw today, but I'll try to be as clear as I can. My presentation is about how community health workers facilitate hope. So in this presentation, I want to explore how community health workers foster hope through their role as practitioners of what I call psychosocial accompaniment. I will begin with a clinical story to illustrate what is it that they do, followed by a brief discussion of the theoretical background of these concepts. And then I'll look at two ways in which accompaniment can serve as catalyst for hope. I arrived at a decaying motel complex. It was a Thursday afternoon, waited for Yi Shen Ma, who is the community health workers I was shadowing at the time. The sky was thick with clouds, casting a soft and muted light over the streets. I was feeling a little bit nervous, a little tingling in the back of my mind. This was unfamiliar territory. I was at a hotel in a very dreadful condition. The motel stood gray and weather-beaten. The paint chipped and faded. Not a single plant in sight to soften the atmosphere. Inside the U-shaped complex, some windows were cracked, amplifying the sense of neglect. A middle-aged Guatemala woman, Gabriela, joined me outside, waiting for Yi Shen Ma, the community health workers. Gabriela's story began in the United States, where she was born. Her childhood was marked by relentless abuse. She said to me, "My sister lost the ability to speak due to the abuse. Her heavy with the weight of the past. My brother was burned with fire for misbehaving." She did not seem keen to reveal more details about her suffering. Perhaps the trauma was too deep to voice to a stranger. Desperate for money, her parents took her to Guatemala when she was only 12, where they sold her to a forced marriage. Her husband was a tyrant, subjecting her to brutal beatings and repeated sexual assaults. Whenever she showed even a hint of defiance, he would cut her face with a knife. The uneven scars on her face and her cheeks stood as a painful memory of the horrors that she had experienced and endured. At age 15, Gabriela became pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter, but it was not a time for celebration. Gabriela thought her daughter's fate would mirror her own, trapped in the same cycle of violence. So desperate to escape, she fled. But the cost of her freedom was that she had to leave her child behind. The thought of her child left in the hands of a man who brutalized her still haunts Gabriela to this day. Her journey took her through Mexico, where she met another man who would become her second husband. Unfortunately, this relationship brought even more pain, as he was both emotionally and physically abusive. They had two sons together, now aged 16 and 12. Gabriela eventually made her way to San Bernardino with her third husband, a man who thankfully was kind and supportive. Together, they're raising a toddler from this marriage, so they have 3 kids, along with Gabriela's 2 older sons from her previous marriage. When Gabriela finally left her second husband and returned to the United States, her ex originally took custody of the 2 boys. Once again, she faced the heartbreak of having to leave her children behind. However, this time she was determined to reunite with them. With her current husband's support, she managed to make regular trips to Tijuana, visiting her sons whenever she could, despite her financial struggles and difficulties finding consistent work. Finally, Gabriela managed to bring her 2 older boys back to the U.S., but they now live in a cramped 1-bedroom motel, the motel that I was visiting. This was a result of an eviction after she lost her job due to missing work following a car accident. When Gabriela stepped outside to meet me, her toddler ran after me and then ran around the complex, trailed by her 12-year-old son, the boy's little older brother, who kept a watchful eye on his younger brother, ensuring he did not wander into the driveway. Gabriella's circumstances were dire. Her last pediatric visit had resulted in a referral to a community health workers, which is how she met Ima. This was their second meeting. And when Gabriella saw Ima's car pull into the complex, her face lit up. They embraced warmly, and Ima waved at Gabriella's boys. It is clear that they share a very strong emotional bond. As they embraced, Gabriella shivered visibly. Ima held her in her arms to comfort her. The family was crammed into a tiny room, so we had to go meet at a nearby McDonald's. Before departing, Ima retrieved a bag of essential items from the car: diapers, groceries, and wet wipes, and more. Gabriella took the bag, her hand pressed to her heart in gratitude. "I am extremely grateful for this," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Ima later recounts, community health workers connects families with resources and community services. In this manner, CHWs follow Jesus' example, she says, by providing tangible support to meet families' basic needs, and later addressing less visible needs such as emotional and spiritual well-being. At McDonald's, Gabriella's older son guided his little toddler brother to the play area, recognizing that his mother needed to speak privately. Ima invited me to sit down with them, explaining that I was there to observe how community health workers work. I thanked them both for allowing me to be part of their conversation. As they spoke in Spanish, Ima paused from time to time to translate key points for me, since I do not speak Spanish, ensuring that Gabriella's voice was fully heard. As Gabriella shared her story, Ima listened intently, nodding gently, her eyes filled with both concern and encouragement. Rather than simply relaying Gabriella's words, Ima highlighted her strengths, her perseverance, courage, and unwavering love for her children. She framed Gabriella's experiences not just as hardships, but as evidence of her resilience and resourcefulness. Through Ima's careful retelling, Gabriella's agency was not only preserved, but uplifted, reinforcing her role as the author of her own story. Although initially hesitant to share too much with a stranger like me, Gabriella turned to me and said, "It is important for people to know the struggle of people like me." Her two most urgent concerns were her financial situation and her children's education. Her 3 kids had been out of school for more than a year. Gabriella, a U.S. citizen, was terrified of enrolling them, fearing that their undocumented status would lead to their removal by authorities. Given her financial struggle, she could not shake the belief that the system would deem her incapable of caring for them. As we talked, the food arrived, and the children's faces lit up. It had been a long time since they had a proper meal. For families like Gabriella's, meals like this are a real treat, explained Ima. She paid for the food herself, as a lot of times community health workers often have to do because those things are not funded. Mentioning that they have to meet in places like McDonald's precisely for the reason that there's no other place to meet for them. And this provides a safe place for them to have a conversation and a rare hot food for families experiencing food insecurity. Throughout the meeting, Ima consistently complimented Gabriella's strength. It's her resilience that makes it possible for her to go to Tijuana to visit her kids. It's her resilience that allowed her to survive such violence and build a new life here. Gabriella nodded, but admitted that she struggled to believe in a bright future. She said, "I don't think anything good can happen to me anymore. I feel like I don't deserve it." The guilt of leaving her daughter behind weighed heavily on her. Before we parted ways, Ima handed Gabriella a brochure for affordable mental health clinic and called city organizations with her to help her secure temporary housing. Part of the packet that was given to her included information about parenting workshops, clothing distribution centers, diaper distribution centers, and free legal counseling services. Gabriela held Ima's hand tightly as they spoke and said, "I'm so grateful to God that someone cares for me. I've always believed in God," Gabriela said, "but I never thought that anyone actually cared for me before. For the first time, I have hope. I have hope because someone cares. For the first time, I have hope because someone cares." What sets community health workers apart is that they are expert practitioners of what's called accompaniment. But what is it exactly? The theory and practice of accompaniment originally emerged in the context of Latin American pastoral workers who have committed to living with marginalized populations as they join their struggle for justice and human flourishing in the 1970s. In essence, accompaniment is journeying with and working toward the psychosocial and spiritual well-being of fellow suffering human beings. It requires a posture of curiosity and openness and a commitment to justice. Accompaniment looks more like two friends walking together, side by side, than the hierarchical relationship between expert and a healthcare consumer. It is important to note that the relational aspect of accompaniment flows from a theological commitment to people experiencing poverty and oppression. Accompaniment is rooted in the idea that marginalized and oppressed peoples have ethical priority. This ethical emphasis is sometimes called the preferential option for the poor. It is grounded in the prophetic tradition of the Hebrew Bible that emphasizes the dignity of those who are most vulnerable in our communities. In contrast to humanitarianism and the practice of charity, accompaniment is defined by mutuality and solidarity. Those accompanied receive the gift of recognition from a caring partner, and those who accompany others recognize themselves as receiving the blessing of other people's sacred stories and gift of friendship. So how do they nurture hope? Gabriela's words illustrate how the accompaniment can create a context where hope can take root, even in the bleakest circumstances. Psychologist Richard Lazarus defines hope as believing that something positive, which does not presently apply to one's life, could still materialize. It is crucial to distinguish hope from optimism, though. As psychologist Jamil Zaki explains, hope is a response to problems, not an evasion of them. If optimism tells us things will get better, hope tells us that they could. Optimism is idealistic, hope is practical. It gives people a glimpse of a better world and pushes them to fight for it. In this sense, then, hope is not just an abstract feeling, but a powerful driver of positive change. So I limit my discussion for today's presentation's sake to two components. First, I believe accompaniment nurtures hope by honoring human agency and human dignity. Second, it does so by by creating new possibilities through new relationships. Throughout Ima's conversation with Gabriela, she consistently paused to acknowledge Gabriela's strengths, actively reframing her story to emphasize that Gabriela is the protagonist of her own life. This emphasis on agency and dignity aligns with the observations of scholars who study accompaniment in various contexts. Reflecting on Oscar Romero's legacy, Stoughton Lynn stresses that liberation is only possible when oppressed people become, quote, the masters and the protagonists in their own struggles. In reclaiming one's agency under challenging circumstances, accompaniment helps counteract feelings of powerlessness and worthlessness, reinforcing the transformative power of hope. Another way accompany facilitates hope is through witnessing. Mary Watkins writes very powerfully that the one who psychosocially accompanies holds the individual's or the community's suffering and well-being in the light of social, cultural, historical, and systemic contexts. Insofar as psychological and community symptoms often memorialize violations that have occurred, the one who accompanies is also a witness. This witnessing is a particular crucial antidote when the events or conditions of suffering have been repressed or denied by those who are in power in the wider society. In other words, bearing witness to another person's experience or narrative of suffering is a powerful act of validation and empowerment that can drive meaningful change. Psychosocial accompaniment recognizes that individual and community suffering is deeply connected to the broader systemic injustices. So by bearing witness, especially when such experiences are denied or silenced by those in power, accompaniment helps restore dignity and agency to those who are affected. Through empathetic engagement, accompaniment fosters hope by affirming a person's community's strength, resilience, and capacity for self-determination. The second way accompaniment cultivates hope is by generating new possibilities through relationships. Barbara Tomlinson and George Lipsitz argue, acts of accompaniment can generate creative alternatives to the limitations of the current historical conjuncture. In other words, relationships of solidarity can generate new meanings and courses of action that are previously foreclosed. Ima and Gabriella's story illustrates how accompaniment cultivates hope by generating new possibilities through relationships. Ima, the community health worker, does more than just provide material assistance. She builds meaningful connections with Gabriella that affirms her dignity and agency. Through compassionate listening and tangible support, Ima helps Gabriella reframe her narrative, shifting narrative from one of despair to one of resilience and strength. Ima fosters a renewed sense of self-worth and possibility by acknowledging Gabriella's struggles while highlighting her perseverance. Additionally, Ima's role as a bridge to community resources expands Gabriella's access to opportunities, demonstrating how accompaniment creates new pathways and new possibilities. The relationship between Ima and Gabriella fosters a renewed sense that things can change and get better. In conclusion then, accompaniment is more than a model of care. It is a profound act of solidarity that nurtures hope, dignity, and agency in the face of adversity. Through the story of Gabriella and Ima, we see how accompaniment moves beyond charity, fostering meaningful relationships that affirm resilience and open pathways to new possibilities. By witnessing suffering, honoring agency, and creating opportunities for transformation, accompaniment becomes a catalyst for hope, not as blind optimism, but as a practical and powerful force for change. In a world marked by injustice and hardship, the practice of accompaniment reminds us that true healing emerges not just through resources and medical treatments, but through relationships rooted in mutual recognition and compassion. Thank you so much.